Good morning, everybody. It's lovely to see all your mostly caffeinated faces this morning. I'm glad they have coffee over there. My name is Jill Brito. Like she said, I work with Vista Solutions Corporation. We're an IT solutions provider and partner based in beautiful Fort Collins, Colorado. Anyone from Fort Collins? Yes, go Rams. Thank you. Awesome. And just so I can get a better idea of who I'm talking to today, can you give me a shout out if you're an IT professional?
Yeah.
Woo woo. Good job. Awesome. Security specifically? Okay. In business management, owner, CEO, those couple. Okay. Have had at least 2 cups of coffee this morning? All right, y'all in the back, you need to go over there. They got some free coffee. Just fill her up, because this will be better. If we're all caffeinated, I've had 4 this morning, so this could go really well or really badly for all of us. So I can imagine that you might be curious, perhaps intrigued by the title of this message. It's not about the breach, and perhaps even more so now, wondering what a girl who looks like she just graduated high school has to say on the subject. But I will get there, but I want to give you a little bit of context to how this all got started. So about 2 years ago, my colleagues and I started having conversations with our friends, colleagues, clients about the topic of cybersecurity. It was something we were getting into at the time. And as we would come back together, we would realize that we're starting to see patterns in what people were saying. And that was this. They were saying, I'm concerned about how to really keep my data safe in an environment where breaches are pretty much inevitable. Some of them said how overwhelmed they felt with just trying to keep up with a landscape that is changing so rapidly. And a few of them, more than a few of them, said, I'm not sure if my job or my business would survive if we discovered we'd been breached. So I don't know if that's anything that any of you ever think about, struggle with. I'm certainly not going to ask you to raise your hand. But if it is, by any chance, I'd just like to say, welcome to the boat that we're all in. There's no silver bullet to security, right? If there were, none of us would be sitting here today. And though I personally find a small amount of solace in knowing that we're all in this together, misery loves company, it doesn't change the reality of the landscape that we're facing, which is this. 3.8 million. That's the average cost of a data breach, not taking into account the mega breaches that have happened over the last couple years, the Anthems, the JP Morgan Chases, the Home Depots, the Targets, which Target, by the way, reported $148 million loss as a result of their breach. 71%. How many of you work in a small to medium business, 500 employees or less? 71% of security breaches will target small to medium businesses. Hackers actually believe that they're easier targets. 205. That's the average number of days it will take a company to discover they've been breached. That's 6.5 months. And 60%. That's the percentage of companies that will go out of business within 6 months of a security breach. Now, I've got a confession to make. I'm not an engineer. I'm not an awesome IT professional like all of you. But, so forgive me if this is a stupid question, but why is this happening? I mean, we live in the most technologically advanced age in history. Was this an incompetent professional? Did someone fall asleep at the monitor at the wrong time? Was it bad technology? The wrong technology? Maybe, in some cases. But I would argue that that's not really the main reason. Because if you look at all these companies that had their names and reputations smeared across the headlines, I guarantee you that they all had top-notch security technology. They also probably had a team of people who were dedicated to one thing, and that was to make sure the company stayed safe. And they got hacked. So I would submit to you that this isn't a technology issue. It's not a competence issue. But really at the core, it's a paradigm issue. It was how these companies approach or failed to approach their security strategy, their core beliefs about what was important and how those beliefs manifested themselves tactically that determined whether they became a statistic or not. Now, I also just realized I told you I'm not a technical person, so it's possible that half of you may have just tuned out a little bit, and that's okay. But over the next few minutes, I'm asking you to think a little bit differently with me and ask yourself this question. Just humor me. What if, just by shifting our paradigm, by slightly changing the way we think about and approach security, we could be so confident that not only we would survive a breach, but we would thrive in spite of one. And that's what I'd like to talk to you about today. I'd like to present to you what I believe to be a traditional paradigm that a lot of companies, at least the ones that I've interacted with, have tactically been approaching security and how it's not keeping us any safer. I'd like to talk to you about why it's not about the breach and what it is really about. And I'd like to present to you 3 questions and a new framework to think about security for your own businesses, and then you can decide if that makes sense moving forward. Sound good? Okay. So let me start with one question. We all want to protect our data, right? Right? Okay, make sure. So what does protect really mean? You ever thought about it? I don't know about you, but I'm constantly bombarded with semi-obnoxious marketing messages saying XYZ solution will protect your data, XYZ product will keep your data safe. But it wasn't until recently that I really stepped back and said, well, what does that really mean? Any thoughts? Shout her out.
We keep talking about protecting data. Aren't we ultimately trying to protect the business, not the data?
Absolutely. Protecting the business. Anyone else? It's a fantastic observation. Well, I don't know about you, but in my conversations over the last few years, what I've found is that although almost every company and every professional in those companies at least gave lip service or strategically adopted the paradigm of assume a breach, that tactically they were still approaching their security like a capsule, right? And what do I mean by that? They're doing their best to build strong walls around their data, do their best to keep the bad guys out and the data in, and rein in that one person that keeps clicking on those phishing emails. So there's always one, right? But there's a problem with this paradigm, and that's this. Despite our multiple layers of preventative security, our firewalls, our IDS, IPS, our SIEM, our malware detection, our antivirus. Any security professional will tell you that nothing is impenetrable. It's just a matter of time. Now, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not at all saying that these are not important components of a security strategy. They absolutely are. But ultimately, that's what they are. They're components. And if they don't form part of a larger, more holistic strategy, they will not serve the purpose for which they were intended. Nothing's impenetrable. Now, I do realize this is a highly simplified illustration. There's only so much you can do in 30 minutes, right? And I'm sure that nobody in this room approaches security this one-dimensionally. We all understand that it's extremely multifaceted. But the point I'm trying to make is that there is a tendency that I've seen to focus more on which set of defense tools to use rather than really addressing the root of the problem. So what's the root of the problem, Jill? Well, let me ask another question. Why are breaches so scary? Why does it make us sweat bullets just to think about it when somebody else gets in the headlines? Well, duh, right? Oh, go ahead.
Well, we hate the sense of loss.
The sense of loss, absolutely. Anyone else?
There could be some financial.
Some financial implications. That's a very eloquent way to put it. Wonderful, yes. You're a victim. Yeah, you've been violated. You've had a crime against you, absolutely. I mean, other things that I can think of, those are fantastic. You know, people lose their jobs. They, you know, revenue is lost. There are financial implications. Lawsuits, general misery, et cetera, et cetera. But if you'll humor me and peel this back one more layer, I would submit to you that the reasons that there are financial implications, the reasons that people lose their jobs, the reasons that there are lawsuits, the reasons that 60% of companies go out of business after 6 months is not because the breach happened. Because we've already established that it's pretty much the status quo. You're more likely to be breached than not. It's not about the breach itself. The real consequences from a breach come from not understanding what's really going on in our environment. I had to throw in a little office space, I'm sorry, gotta love it. And so that's really the ultimate question. Do you know what's going on in your environment? Do you have the visibility to see deep and wide into your network so you can understand exactly what's going on in real time, detect faster, and remediate faster? Because believe it or not, there are actually companies employing visibility technology to help them achieve this goal and to really see what's happening real time in their network. So how does this work? Well, I like to think of it as security cameras in a building, right? If you think about how you're going to protect a building, there's the alarms that go off when something happens, right? They secure the perimeter, alert the authorities, everything that they do. Now, the security cameras aren't the alarms, obviously, but they form a part of a very holistic security strategy. Because what can they do? They can monitor everything that's happening up to the point of a breach. They can tell you who got in, how they got in, what happened. And then afterwards, you can rewind the tapes and see exactly what happened. So you can triage faster and remediate before irreparable damage is done. Now, if you were to liken this to what I would call an attack continuum, if you were to think of a breach in 3 distinct phases, before a breach, during a breach, and after a breach. The during phase, when the alarm goes off, right? When all of our defense tools kick into gear. I would argue that we probably spend the majority of our time, efforts, and resources focusing on the during phase, making sure that alarm is going off, when in reality the real consequences of a breach are our lack of visibility, our lack of security cameras in the before and the after. Because without visibility into our network, it's taking us 205 days to discover we've been breached. Without security cameras, it's costing us $3.8 million just to go back and try to figure out what the hell happened, right? So if you don't think I'm totally crazy at this point, I'd like to present to you 3 questions and start thinking about these in the context of your own business. These are questions that we help guide our clients through as they're thinking about security in the framework of this attack continuum. So the first question, if you think about before a breach, do you know what's there? Do you know what's in your environment? Do you have a comprehensive map of every system, every resource that's on your network? Because if we can't identify everything that's there, how can we expect our defense tools to effectively protect it? Now, you may be saying, well, I've got IDS, IPS, I test on a daily. Well, those are fantastic technologies, but they will only test for elements in the network that they're aware of. If they can't see them, they can't test for them, and they can't protect them. So what do I mean by a map? Well, this is just an example of a map, a service map that a company recently did for their network, or at least a splice of it. And they were using these visibility tools to make this map. And by the way, before they did this, they were actually not aware of any of these elements on their network, much less were they monitoring them. They were actually doing this with a spreadsheet before. So now that they have this, they were able to monitor traffic, communication between ports and protocols in real time. How awesome is that, right? And the point of all this is that if we can't see it, we can't protect it. Something to think about. Second question I would ask is, before a breach, do you know what's normal in your network? So you can classify what's abnormal. Young Frankenstein, anybody? Thank you, appreciate that. That's right. Have you baselined what you believe to be normal communications, normal behaviors within your network so you can quickly identify anomalies? Let me give you an example. Let's say for your business, you've determined that all credit card swipe terminals should be communicating with an IP address in Denver, and only that IP address. Now, if you've baselined that that's normal behavior, that's what's supposed to happen, and anything outside of that is an anomaly, you can quickly set up an alert when that terminal starts communicating with an IP address in Russia. Right? So do you know what's normal in your network? And if you're armed with this level of knowledge of your network topology, you can then designate what's important and monitor communication between, monitor ports and communications between all these nodes. One more thing I'd like to mention with knowing what's normal. one of the beautiful things about visibility technology is that because it allows you to see into the depths and the breadths of your network, you can detect anomalies deeper within your network that might otherwise have gone unnoticed. So for example, sometimes attacks won't manifest themselves as blatant attacks, right? They may manifest themselves as network or application performance issues. Because if you think about it, let's say someone sneaks in and they're sneaking terabytes of data out of your network. It's not unlikely that that could cause a bandwidth issue, cause your networks or the applications on those networks to underperform. Now, this technology allows you to quickly drill down to the root cause of that performance issue and determine within minutes whether it was a server glitch, whether it was bad application code, or whether it was something else. It's pretty cool. And last question, after a breach, can you determine what happened? Who stuck their hand in the cookie jar? When it happened? How it happened? Can you rewind the tapes so that you can quickly triage the damage and remediate before irreparable damage is done? Because with the proper visibility in place, you can actually monitor behaviors in the minutes before and after an attack, things like traffic, business unit processes, user and admin activity, and you can immediately determine whether that attack was just a nuisance or whether it was a targeted attempt to exfiltrate your data. Think about it this way, how much faster, less expensively, less painfully could you solve a crime if you had access to the security tapes versus if you didn't? Now, just a few parting thoughts as we go our separate ways this morning. A little over 4 years ago, former FBI Director Robert S. Mueller III was quoted as saying this: there are two types of companies, those who have been hacked and those who will be. And even those are converging into one category, companies that have been hacked and will be hacked again. The traditional paradigm that many companies are approaching security, at least tactically, one where we build walls around our data and do our best to keep the bad guys out and the data in, ultimately, where has that gotten us? Are we any safer because of it? Now, I would venture to guess you all probably have adequate defenses in your network. You're probably even testing them on a daily to make sure that they could withstand an intrusion if and when it happened. But my question to you today is, how comprehensive is it? How confident are you that your strategy doesn't have an Achilles heel? And do you really know what's going on in your network? And have you thought about how visibility might play into that? Now, I do want to thank you for your time this morning. I understand that probably for many of you in this room, it's probably not something that is worth having a further conversation about. Hopefully this has been entertaining, if nothing else. But for the one or two of you in here that maybe something discussed today got you thinking a little differently, asking questions, why don't you come talk to myself or one of my colleagues at some point today, and you can decide if it makes sense to have a conversation. And we have popcorn. Thank you.